In this video, we're diving into the topic of ignoring, more specifically, the intentional use of silence or emotional withdrawal. When used strategically, ignoring becomes a potent psychological technique. It's a form of assertive manipulation that can generate powerful results, often surpassing what most men anticipate. This approach isn't just useful during the early stages of a relationship to establish control and resolve minor disputes. It's also highly effective when trying to rekindle a connection after a breakup. At its core, this tactic enables a swift and decisive shift in the balance of power. I'll also address some widespread misunderstandings and misleading advice surrounding the concept of ignoring. If you search the topic online, you'll likely come across a lot of inaccurate or oversimplified information. One of the most popular and flawed in ideas is that arguing in relationships is completely normal, and as long as both parties make up afterward, everything will be fine. But that assumption is deeply mistaken. If conflict is a consistent pattern in your relationship, there are really only two explanations. First, you may have chosen a difficult partner, someone who naturally causes friction and misunderstandings. Second, you might have failed to take a clear, confident role in the relationship. If you've allowed her to believe she can constantly challenge you, make you jealous, or rely on you to make the first move to fix things, that leads to unwanted dynamics. A disagreement is, by definition, a clash of opposing interests. Every time a fight happens, one person gains influence while the other loses it. I see this pattern all the time in my coaching sessions. In many cases, a single mishandled argument can turn the tables completely, placing the woman in a dominant role and diminishing her interest in the man over time. In one of my previous videos, I shared a real example, and there are countless more like it, where a man made a mistake and then apologized. On the surface, that seems fair. If you're wrong, you say sorry. But instinctually, it's not about being right or wrong. What truly matters is who bends first. And when a man apologizes in that way, it's often interpreted as weakness. Here's what happened. This man had been in a calm, stable relationship for about 2.5 years. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. One day, his girlfriend went to a class reunion and ended up staying overnight. There was no real cause for suspicion, but he lost his temper and started sending her angry messages, full of accusations. Up to that point, she had been in a more passive role, so when she returned, she didn't argue, but she was clearly offended. A few days later, the man began to feel bad about what happened. He thought, I probably overreacted, and decided to visit her with a bouquet of flowers to make amends. They reconciled, or so it seemed, but the foundation of their relationship had already shifted. 2 months later, she left him. So what could he have done differently? At the very least, he should have taken a break, maybe paused for a week or so. There's a strong chance that she would have reached out to him first. If she came forward in a calm or neutral tone, he could have responded accordingly. The key is to exit a conflict without doing further damage. Now let's talk more about conflict itself. When handled correctly, conflict isn't always negative. In fact, it can be a very effective way to reassert authority and strengthen emotional bonds. I've even used this method before meeting someone in person. One example comes to mind from about 8 years ago. I met a girl on VK, a social network, and we started chatting. She was attractive and initially showed a lot of interest. I didn't feel much spark at first, but we eventually decided to talk over the phone. During our long call, she made a joke that I didn't find funny. I replied with a few neutral statements and then said, "Hey, I've got to run. Let's catch up later." And I ended the call. 15 minutes later, she sent me a message. I didn't reply. Another one came 15 minutes after that. Still no response. Then about 20 minutes later, she messaged me again, this time with a full apology. "I'm sorry for the joke. I was out of line." That's when I chose to respond and continued the conversation. The outcome? Her interest in me noticeably intensified. That's how effective strategic silence can be. It might last for less than an hour, or it could stretch out for several months, even half a year. That's perfectly normal. I've even applied this technique before I had the chance to meet someone face to face. Here's another story. I was around 20 years old and had just gone on a date with a girl. There was mutual attraction, but she had firmly decided that nothing would happen between us on the first date. I said, fair enough, and went home. Now, I also happened to have a secondary fake social media profile, something I used occasionally for certain situations. I decided to test it out here. Using that account, I started messaging her, and to my surprise, she responded warmly and continued the conversation enthusiastically. The fake profile I used was put together well enough to be believable. I managed to spark a mutual connection with her. I don't remember all the exact details that followed, but at some point I revealed that it was actually me behind the account. As soon as she realized, she blocked me everywhere. What happened next? Day 1, silence. Day 2, still nothing. On the third day, I got a message from an unknown number saying something like, "What kind of childish game is this?" Silence again. Then on day 4, she came back, full of apologies, trying to explain herself. I started getting calls from hidden numbers. Eventually, we had a second date, and everything went perfectly from there. This is another example of how ignoring works. And mind you, I didn't even have any real claim over her. We had just gone on one date. She had every right to talk to whoever she wanted. But that's the power of this method. One of its key effects is triggering guilt. Women often crave emotional drama, and ignoring taps directly into that. Here's another situation that came up recently. A man had been in a relationship for about 3 years. He found out that the massage therapist his girlfriend regularly visited was making subtle moves on her. Naturally, he wasn't okay with that kind of ambiguous interaction. When he confronted her about it, she reacted negatively. It led to a typical argument, and despite his disapproval, she went to see the same massage therapist again. Now, what do most men do in situations like this? They start acting out, texting angrily, accusing, trying to reason with her, proving they're right. But these reactions rarely work. What he should have done was remain silent, gone completely cold. Ignoring someone right after they've crossed a line is especially powerful because it amplifies their guilt over time, growing exponentially. In such cases, you don't need to say much. If she already knows you're aware of what happened, you can simply go silent, enter a full state of detachment, and wait until her emotions start boiling over. Let's look at another classic case. A woman casually throws out something like, "Maybe we should break up," hoping to scare the guy into begging her to stay. She's likely used this tactic before and seen it work, maybe with an ex. So she assumes it'll work again? That's your chance to turn the tables. Let her pack her things, head to her mom's, and you go completely silent. Don't read her messages, don't reply, don't engage at all. You maintain total distance until the situation reaches a pressure point. What usually happens is men get offended at first, then continue to engage with her. She throws in a comment during a chat, and he takes the bait. She accuses him. He defends himself. That's a trap. All of that back and forth arguing weakens your position. What actually works is going fully silent. There are 3 main emotional stages a woman will go through when you do this. Confusion. She doesn't understand what's going on. Frustration. She starts getting angry at your silence. Regret. Eventually, she feels sorry and wants to reconnect. Sometimes she shows these signs clearly, like by reaching out or sending pings. Other times, it's just radio silence. But you wait until that third phase, regret, before making any move. Now, when it comes to winning a woman back through ignoring, the method is incredibly effective. It creates an instant shift in roles. You take her from a place of rejection straight to a place of re-engagement. But make no mistake, there are lots of details behind this process. First, how you initiate the silence matters. Sometimes you just have to sit tight and be patient. In other cases, you can provoke a situation that leads to the break. This could be done around a holiday or by creating an excuse for contact, like if she has some of your things or vice versa. You can plan a run-in or deliver a message designed to put her on the defensive. All of these are ways to trigger that shift. You also need to understand how the emotional journey of ignoring unfolds. You must be able to read her reactions and adjust your strategy. Some women will start reaching out frequently, sending pings to test the waters. Others will go completely quiet and seem emotionally shut down. Some women are highly emotional. They need time to sit in that silence, feel the absence deeply, and reach a point where they genuinely regret their actions. It's not uncommon to see them resurface after just a week of silence, but that's often just an emotional outburst, a moment of weakness, not a true change of heart. If you take her back too soon, thinking everything's fixed, she may quickly return to her old behavior. She won't feel like she's at risk of losing you, and nothing truly changes. When I talk about timelines, a week or more, I'm referring specifically to situations where the couple is already broken up. But if you're still actively in a relationship, the effects can show up much sooner. You might think, she reached out. Everything's fine now, but not so fast. That sudden emotional outburst is usually just a fleeting impulse. Maybe she felt lonely or sad in that moment. You took her back too quickly, and now the fear of losing you is gone. Everything just goes back to the way it was. That's the danger of reacting too soon. Again, when I talk about timelines like a week or more, I'm referring specifically to situations after a breakup. The return phase. In ongoing relationships, the effects of ignoring can show up faster and resolve more quickly with shorter periods of silence. It's also essential to know when to apply pressure and how to do it. There are many layers to this. If we're talking about the topic of ignoring, this is really a full lecture in itself. In fact, I plan to release a more structured, comprehensive version of this material soon, either as a dedicated video series or part of an info product on a new website I'm building. That will dive deeper into each specific scenario. Let's now talk about how long to maintain silence. In cases where a woman has already left the relationship and her emotional connection to you is essentially gone, her attachment is at zero, you're looking at roughly 6 weeks to 2 months before she might even consider reaching out. And this is assuming you've stayed completely silent. Here's the key point. A lot of people who think they're ignoring aren't actually doing it right. One of the biggest misunderstandings I see is not knowing when the ignoring actually begins. For example, if you had an argument a month ago and haven't spoken since, and now, finally, she messages you for the first time, that's when the clock starts. Everything before that was just a break, not true silence. Only now are the effects of ignoring starting to take shape. Men often confuse a break, a rejection, and active ignoring, but they're not the same. Each creates a different emotional impact. Ignoring only begins when either you stop replying to her calls or messages, or you deliberately enter that state after some kind of interaction. And remember, ignoring only works if it's total. Partial silence is a critical mistake. There was a guy who once messaged me saying, "Maxim, I've been following your method. I've been ignoring her for 6 months. She's pinged me a few times, but I'm still sticking to the plan." Then he sent me the messages she had written. I looked them over and told him, "Buddy, this isn't ignoring." He said, "What do you mean?" I haven't reached out. But after a little digging, it turned out he had replied a few times. In a neutral tone, sure, but still replied. That's not ignoring. Real ignoring means no response. None. Some online advice says, ignore her for 3 weeks or a month. If she doesn't reach out, go ahead and message her. That's wrong. After 3 weeks, things are just beginning. If you're trying to rebuild a broken connection, 3 weeks means nothing to her. She'll just think you're playing hard to get. and she won't take it seriously. Real ignoring works slowly. It builds pressure over time. You can't rush the process. People often ask me, Maxime, give us the step-by-step. How do we enter this phase? How do we exit it? What triggers the change? I've told many stories where women reached their emotional boiling point. Some of them went to wild lengths, flying in from other countries, showing up at the guy's apartment, waiting outside his door. These weren't fantasies. They happened because the pressure built up to that point. Actually, let me show you something from a recent case. I won't reveal her name, but here's a message this girl sent on November 17th. She writes, "Hello, my dear. How are you? How have you been? Is everything okay with you? Please write to me." She hadn't written anything for 2 whole months. It was a very difficult situation emotionally. We had started from absolute zero. Her next message came a bit later. "I've made a lot of mistakes in life. Please forgive me for everything. Happy International Men's Day." That last part came on a national holiday. And that's another pattern. Women often come out of the silent phase on holidays, using them as an excuse to reach out. That message came on a holiday, a convenient excuse for her to break the silence. Then on February 25th, she wrote again, "Is everything okay with you?" More messages followed after that. Eventually, they may have spoken again. The client didn't send me further updates. But what matters is that over 2 months of silence had passed before she even started pinging again. And that's exactly what we were waiting for. These things depend heavily on the specific situation and the woman's personality type. That's why every case needs to be examined on an individual basis. So what's my overall advice when it comes to using the silent treatment in an ongoing relationship? If you commit to it, you must follow through. You can't start ignoring her and then, a few weeks later, decide to be the first to reach out and make peace. That's like starting a war and then surrendering halfway through. A lot of guys say, "I'll ignore her for 3 or 4 weeks, and if she doesn't reach out, I'll message her myself." But if you do that, she'll see your message and think, I knew he'd cave eventually. The power of silence is instantly lost. That's why I plan to release a full series on this topic, because just scratching the surface takes nearly 2 hours. In fact, some men have booked entire 90-minute consultations just to dive into the specifics of how ignoring really works. And honestly, there's almost no accurate information about this online. Don't even bother searching. It's not there. If you're using silence while still in a relationship, then yes, you can start applying it right away when she messes up. But if we're talking about reconciliation after a breakup, it's a different game. A lot of people also ask, what are the chances this will work? And here's the truth. Ignoring is incredibly effective, but it doesn't guarantee results in every case. Not every woman can be won back, especially when we're starting from a place where she's actively pulling away or feels emotionally disconnected. Still, the beauty of ignoring is that it doesn't just work on her, it also works on you. It gives you time to stabilize your own emotional state and lower her importance in your mind, which is absolutely crucial. I've seen cases where things resolved quickly, sometimes in a month or a month and a half. But during that time, the guy was obsessing, checking her social media, stressing constantly. In the end, she did come back, only for him to fall into the same pattern and mess up again. Naturally, that brought him back to the same question. Maxim, what should I do now? Think of this video as an introduction, a way to give you a foundational understanding of what the ignore technique actually is. If you're curious about the real-life examples, the step-by-step entry and exit strategies, and the outcomes we've seen in different cases, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.